Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today we're going to be testing out the new Armani Luminous Silk Sunlit Creamy Bronzing Powder. So I believe this has been out for about 3 weeks at this point. However, it just became available in Canada. I ordered mine directly off the Armani website. That's the only place I've seen that actually has it in Canada right now. So I will of course leave this link down below if you're interested, but this is the new Luminous Silk Creamy Bronzer. I picked up the shade 90, which is the lightest one. I believe there was 4 shades in total. So I did pay 76 Canadian dollars for this, so very pricey, but definitely very typical for Armani. I believe this is around $50 to $55 US. This is made in China and has a 24-month shelf life. So Armani did release some new blushes last year, and I was really excited to see them come out with a new bronzer. So this is what the inner packaging looks like. It is huge and it is also very heavy. It's also very thick. For size comparison, I did pull out my Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush bronzer, so you can see size-wise the Charlotte Tilbury is actually a bit bigger, but the Armani is definitely thicker and a bit heavier. And this is what the bronzer looks like inside. So we have a little bit of an embossment here. We do have the Armani logo. You do get a nice large mirror right here as well. This looks really nice. I can see right now that there appears to be sort of glitter particles in here. So I'm hoping this isn't going to be an overly glittery bronzer, but let's actually just put this on the face and then I will show you some swatch comparisons to some of the other most used bronzers in my collection and share my overall thoughts. So first, let's do a little bit of a swatch. It does feel very smooth and silky to the touch. So here is what the shade 90 looks like. So it's quite nice. It does look quite warm, and it definitely does look like it's going to be a glowy bronzer. So let's start on this side. I'm just going to grab my BK Beauty 103 brush. This is my favorite for bronzer. I'm just going to swirl that all over the product. Okay. Okay, that shade looks really nice. Very pigmented. Okay. I wasn't expecting that level of pigment. Okay. Just flipping over my brush to hopefully blend that out a little bit better. Okay, so definitely a lot more pigmented than I expected. I'm surprised that the shade is almost a bit deep for me. It is very warm, almost too much so. I'm just gonna grab my sponge just so I can kind of pat around those edges, maybe take down some of that orange. I don't want to say it's orange because that has a really negative meaning, particularly for those of us that have fair skin, but I do want to point out that this is definitely on the warm side and it is definitely very pigmented for what I expected. Okay, so I'm going to go in, I'm going to tap a little bit lighter this time with the brush. I'm going to be a little bit more careful. I think I definitely just went in a little too heavy last time. I picked up a little too much product. And that is what happened on the other side, because on this side it looks really nice. Still a little warmer than I would like, but still really nice. I will say, I do like how it sits on the skin. Even on this side where I've gotten way too much product, it still looks quite nice. It looks almost airbrushed on the skin, so I really like that. So we can see this is the side where I picked up way too much product. Definitely warm, definitely very pigmented. And this side is where I kind of did a much nicer job. And it looks really quite nice. I do think the powder itself is quite flattering and it does look quite airbrushed on the skin. So I do think that looks very pretty. If I look really close, I can see some shimmery particles on my skin up here, but I don't notice them on my cheeks. However, looking at the compact, I do not think that glitter is an overspray. I think it's all through the product. So if you don't like that, I would definitely pass on this one. Okay, to finish off, I'm just going to go in with my Armani Luminous Silk Glow Blush, and I have the shade 51. I do really like this blush formula. These came out last year and I just think they're so pretty. Yeah, it looks really pretty with that bronzer. Okay, so I think this looks quite nice. I do think that the bronzer shade is definitely on the warm side. So if you are as fair as I am and you don't like super warm bronzers, maybe this isn't the one for you. However, I would also recommend going in with a lighter hand because this is a lot more pigmented than I expected. I definitely underestimated the pigment level in here. So I did want to do some brief comparisons from some of the other bronzers I have in my collection, some of my most used bronzers. I don't have a lot of radiant bronzers like this. I do tend to prefer a more matte option. But for shade comparisons, I did compare this to the Haus Labs bronzer. So I had the shade Light Level 1 in the Haus Labs. So I will say the Haus Labs is definitely much more neutral of a shade. It's not going to pull orange or too warm the way the Armani kind of does, and the Haus Labs is also very matte. I did try comparing the Armani to my Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless bronzer, but I'll be honest with you, the Charlotte Tilbury is so fair that it really doesn't even show up in swatch, so there wasn't really a point. I did want to dig this out for size comparison though, and just to let you know that the Charlotte Tilbury, like I said, it's so light it almost doesn't show up in swatches. I have the shade 1 Fair, and if you are any darker than I am, this is not going to show up on you. Her shade range isn't so great. But I did pull out one of my Pat McGrath bronzers in the shade Naked Desire, which is also, I believe, the lightest one. And the Pat McGrath shade is definitely also very matte. It is definitely more neutral as well, but I found the Pat McGrath, honestly, I believe these came out last year, and when I swatched the Pat McGrath, it felt very dry compared to the Armani, which feels very, very silky. So that was a bit of a difference there as well. I was kind of surprised to find the Pat McGrath seemed a little bit dry. It does apply beautifully and look beautiful on the skin though. I also pulled out one of my MAC matte skin finish bronzers that came out last year. I had the shade Light Rosy. So in comparison, the MAC definitely feels smooth, but very much less smooth than the Armani. Again, that Armani definitely feels very, very silky. However, the MAC shades are really good. They have a really great shade range in these, and this one does not pull yellow at all. This one is in the shade Light Rosy, so it's kind of got that rosy undertone, which is absolutely fabulous if you are fair like me and you have a bit of a cooler undertone, because it just looks more like a natural sun-kissed bronze rather than a bright orange bronze. So I do appreciate the shade of the MAC a little bit better. Formula wise, I wouldn't say they're the same. The MAC is definitely matte, but MAC does have a line of radiant bronzers as well. And the last bronzer I wanted to compare to in my collection is a drugstore option, and this is the Physicians Formula Butter Bronzer in the shade Light Bronzer. So the reason I wanted to pull out my Physicians Formula is because it has a slight radiance to it as well, but it's a very soft radiance. It doesn't have any glitter to it the way that the Armani does. It also feels very smooth and buttery, as we know. And I do think the light bronze shade of the Physicians Formula is a bit lighter. It does have a slight yellow tone to it, which I never really noticed before until I started swatching it next to some of the others, but it doesn't turn me orange. It just looks really nice on the skin. So that's the overall difference there. So comparing to radiant bronzers, again, I don't have a lot of radiant bronzers in my collection because I do prefer a matte option, but something about this just kept calling to me. I think the packaging on this is so pretty. I absolutely love the packaging. The component, everything feels very, very expensive. If you are fair like me and you really hate warm bronzers, I would maybe skip on this, or otherwise just go in with a light hand like I did over here, and it seemed to be quite nice, although still a little bit warmer than I would typically prefer. I think if you love a warm bronzer, you might enjoy this. I think you also have to really like a radiant bronzer. Like, this isn't too much. It's not giving a highlight effect, but when I look closely at my skin, like I said, I can see some glitter particles on my forehead. I did go in heavy on my forehead, but I feel like this does still leave a little bit of that shimmery finish behind. So if you don't like that, I would definitely skip this. But if you had your eye on it and you think it's pretty, you like a radiant bronzer, and you don't mind something that is a little bit warm, you might really, really like this. I will, of course, update you at the very end of the month with my final thoughts. I do think this is very, very pretty. I'm happy with my purchase. I'm so glad I finally got my hands on this. I love the packaging. I quite like the bronzer itself. I love how it feels so silky. I love how easy it was to blend. It really didn't take much to blend it out. Keep in mind, on this side, I definitely went in with way too much right away, so I would go in with a lighter hand than I did, but I still think it's absolutely gorgeous. I am not used to more radiant bronzers that have these more shimmery particles in them, so again, if you don't like that, I would stay away from this. But if you don't mind that, if you like a bronzer that's glowy, I think you would really, really enjoy this. Just if you are near my skin tone, go with a light hand and be careful. But otherwise, I think this is pretty, and I think I will end up really, really liking it, particularly for the summer. Maybe if I get a little bit more color to my skin. It's not likely, but if I do, I will really enjoy this. And going in with a much lighter hand, I think it looks very, very pretty. It gives a really nice soft radiance, soft bronze kind of look to the skin, and I think it's pretty. But overall, I love it. Just keep in mind, if you don't love an overly warm bronzer or a glowy bronzer, skip this. Otherwise, I think it's beautiful. But that is it for me today. Let me know down below. Were you curious about this one? Are you thinking of picking it up? Let me know. I love hearing from you guys so, so much. But that is it for me today. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!